Everyone who worked Chicago's graveyard shift learned 3 survival rules fast. Watch the tables, not the parking lot. Keep the coffee hot. Never make eye contact with the men in leather. For 18 months, Dana Burgos had followed those rules like scripture, serving burned eggs and weak coffee to bikers who settled business behind Mel's Diner where decent people didn't look. She'd mastered the art of strategic blindness, eyes down, hands steady, memory conveniently blank. But the moment she glanced through the grease-streaked window at 2 a.m. and locked eyes with Harry Bittner dragging a man across the asphalt by his throat, every rule dissolved like sugar in black coffee. Because that look, that single moment of witnessed violence, was a death sentence. And Harry Bittner had spent 15 years building the Iron Wraith's MC on one sacred rule. Witnesses don't survive to talk. And if you're new here, welcome to the channel. This is where broken people find each other in the darkest places. Hit subscribe, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about monsters and redemption. Harry stood in the parking lot now, chrome rings catching streetlight, tattoos crawling up his neck like battle scars mapping territory. His crew surrounded the diner. The manager locked himself in the office. The cook vanished out the back. Dina was alone with the man whose rule she'd just broken. Then Harry did something that made her blood freeze solid. He stepped aside and gestured to the door. Not mercy, an invitation to the execution ground. Because waiting in the parking lot was Rex. 90 pounds of brutalized Pitbull, 3 years of perfect kills, Harry's living weapon. And when Harry gave the command, a single word in a language only death understood, Rex launched forward with teeth bared and murder gleaming in scarred eyes. But then, 3 feet from Dina, the monster collapsed into a whimpering dog. He sat at her feet, and for the first time in 3 years, the weapon everyone feared looked like what he'd once been. Someone's stolen innocence. Dina dropped to her knees, placed her palm against his scarred face, and made the choice that would either save her life or end it in the next 30 seconds. She looked at the biker boss who could end her with a word and said the most dangerous truth she'd ever spoken. I know what you did to him. The assault happened at 2:17 a.m. on a Wednesday, which should have been Dina's first warning that this shift would break differently than all the others. She'd been wiping down table 6 when the headlights cut through the parking lot darkness. Not the usual rumble of Harleys, but the predatory purr of expensive bikes, the kind that meant serious business was about to go down behind Mel's Diner, where the security cameras had convenient blind spots. Dina kept wiping. She'd learned that skill during her first week on the graveyard shift, after a regular had grabbed her wrist and explained the rules of survival in a voice that allowed no questions. You see everything. You remember nothing. You keep your goddamn head down. For 18 months, that's exactly what she'd done. Her shift at Mel's paid $11.50 an hour, plus tips that averaged another $40 on good nights. It wasn't much, but it covered rent on her studio apartment, and left enough for groceries and the gas money she needed to drive out to the underground dog rescue 3 times a week. The rescue didn't pay. Couldn't pay. Operating in the legal gray zone where abused fighting dogs got second chances away from the eyes of animal control and law enforcement. But it kept her sane. It kept her connected to something that mattered more than survival. So when the sounds from the parking lot escalated, raised voices, the crack of bone on metal, the distinct thud of a body hitting asphalt, Dina kept her eyes on the table she was cleaning. Spray bottle in one hand, rag in the other, moving in methodical circles. Don't look. Don't remember. Don't get involved. The voices outside cut off abruptly. Dina's hands paused. That kind of silence, the heavy, suffocating kind that followed violence, triggered something primal in her nervous system. She'd heard it before, in bad neighborhoods, in the rescue when they brought in dogs so traumatized they'd gone quiet, because even whimpering drew punishment. It was the silence of something broken beyond easy repair. Her eyes flicked to the window. Just a glance. A fraction of a second. But that was enough. Through the grease-streaked glass, illuminated by the single flickering streetlight, Dina saw a man in a leather vest dragging another man across the asphalt by his throat. The victim's feet scraped uselessly against the ground. The attacker moved with casual efficiency. No rage, no hesitation, just the cold competence of someone who'd done this enough times that it had become routine. Chrome rings flashed on the attacker's fingers, tattoos crawled up his neck, intricate designs that mapped territory in ink and scar tissue, and then the attacker looked up, straight at her, through the window. Direct eye contact. Time fractured. Dina's brain screamed at her to look away, to pretend she hadn't seen, to go back to wiping the table like nothing had happened. But her body had frozen in that terrible moment of recognition, not of the man's face, but of what she'd just become. A witness. The man in the leather vest, Harry Bittner, though Dina didn't know his name yet, released his victim and straightened. His expression didn't change. No anger, no concern. Just cold calculation. He'd seen her see him, and in Harry Bittner's world, that was a death sentence. The victim on the ground scrambled to his feet and ran, disappearing into the darkness between buildings. Harry didn't chase him, didn't even watch him go. His eyes stayed locked on Dina. Then he started walking toward the diner. The spray bottle slipped from Dina's grip, crashing to the floor and spraying industrial cleaner across her worn sneakers. Her heart hammered against her ribs with such violence she thought it might crack bone. Behind her, Marcus, the night manager, had emerged from the office. He took one look at the man approaching the diner and his face went gray. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "That's Harry Bittner." The name meant nothing to Dina. Her life existed in the narrow bandwidth of rent checks, dog rescue schedules, and survival math. She didn't follow the news, didn't pay attention to the criminal hierarchy that governed Chicago's underworld, but Marcus clearly did. "You looked at him," Marcus said, his voice climbing toward panic. "You fucking looked at him during business." "I didn't mean—" "Doesn't matter." Marcus was already backing toward the office. "I got a wife, I got kids, I can't—" He disappeared into the office. The lock clicked. Dina was alone in the dining room when Harry Bittner walked through the front door. He didn't burst in, didn't brandish weapons, didn't make threats. He simply entered, and the entire atmosphere of Mel's diner changed. The fluorescent lights seemed dimmer. The air grew heavier. Even the ancient HVAC system seemed to quiet its rattling, as if the building itself recognized the presence of something apex predatory. Harry Bittner was younger than Dina expected, mid-30s, with the kind of face that photographers would call hard-edged, and people who'd crossed him would call the last thing they saw. He wore his leather vest over a black thermal shirt that revealed muscular arms sleeved in tattoos. His dark hair was cropped close. His jaw carried the permanent shadow of someone who'd never be fully clean-shaven. But it was his eyes that made Dina's survival instincts scream. Cold, calculating, utterly devoid of mercy. The eyes of someone who'd made violence into a business model and never looked back. "You saw something," Harry said. Not a question. A statement of fact. Dina's mouth had gone dry. "I didn't see anything. You looked right at me. I was just cleaning. I didn't—" "You saw my face during business." Harry took another step forward, and Dina noticed the other bikers filing into the diner behind him. 6 of them, all wearing the same leather vest with the Iron Wraiths patch. All watching her with the cold interest of people evaluating a problem that needed permanent resolution. Through the window, Dina could see more bikers surrounding the building. The exit routes were closed. Harry's voice remained conversational, almost pleasant. "I have a rule. It's kept me alive and out of prison for 15 years. Very simple rule." He paused, and in that pause, Dina heard everything she needed to know about how this would end. Anyone who witnesses my business doesn't walk away breathing." The words hung in the grease-scented air of Mel's diner like an executioner's blade hovering above her neck. "I can forget," Dina whispered. "I'm good at forgetting. Everyone who works here is good at—" "You locked eyes with me." Harry's tone didn't change. Still conversational. Still pleasant. Which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying. "That's not something either of us can forget." He gestured toward the door, a simple, almost courteous movement. "Let's go outside." Dina's legs had gone numb. Her brain cycled through escape scenarios with increasing desperation. Run to the kitchen, blocked. Run to the bathroom, trapped. Scream. No one within earshot who'd risk calling police on Harry Bittner. No way out except through the door Harry indicated. She walked. The night air hit her like a slap, cold, sharp, carrying the smell of oil and exhaust and the particular metallic scent that follows violence. The parking lot seemed impossibly large and simultaneously crushingly small. Streetlight cast everything in harsh shadows. The iron wraiths formed a loose circle around her, and in the center of that circle, chained to a steel post near Harry's bike, was Rex. Dina registered the Pitbull in fragments. Massive, easily 90 pounds of solid muscle. Scarred. Old wounds mapping his face and shoulders like a testimony to systematic brutalization. Deadly, the way he held himself low and coiled, radiating the particular tension of a weapon waiting for deployment. But it was his eyes that made Dina's heart crack. Dead eyes. The eyes of an animal who'd had his spirit systematically crushed until only function remained. She'd seen those eyes before. At the rescue. In dogs pulled from fighting rings and abusive homes. Dogs so traumatized that saving them required months of patient work to convince them that touch didn't always mean pain. Harry moved to stand beside Rex, his hand resting casually on the dog's head. "Rex handles witnesses for me now. Cleaner than guns. No ballistics. No witnesses except the ones who don't survive to testify." Rex's muscles tensed at Harry's touch, not with affection, but with the conditioned response of something trained through pain to obey. "He's never failed," Harry continued, his voice carrying that same pleasant conversational tone. 3 years, 27 eliminations, perfect record. Dina couldn't breathe. "You probably think you can run." Harry's hand moved to the chain. "They always think they can run. But Rex is faster, and what Rex doesn't finish, my crew does." The chain rattled as Harry unclipped it from Rex's collar. The Pitbull's entire demeanor shifted, from contained tension to coiled violence ready to explode. "Any last words?" Harry asked politely. Dina's mind went blank. Pure white static terror. Harry spoke a single word, guttural, harsh, in a language Dina didn't recognize but understood viscerally as a kill command. Rex launched. 90 pounds of weaponized trauma exploding forward with teeth bared and murder gleaming in those dead eyes. And then, 3 feet from Dina, Rex stopped. Not a gradual stop. Not a hesitation. A complete system failure. The aggression collapsed. His ears flattened against his skull. His body lowered. And then Rex did something that made every member of Harry's crew go absolutely silent. He sat down at Dina's feet and whimpered. Not a threatening sound. Not aggression. Recognition. Dina stared at the Pitbull who should be killing her, and her entire brain rewired in an instant. She wasn't seeing a weapon anymore. She was seeing the trauma pattern she'd learned to recognize at the rescue. The specific way Rex held his scarred body. The tremor in his muscles. The desperate, confused way he looked up at her. Like he'd just found something he didn't know he'd been searching for. Safety. Her hands moved on pure instinct, lowering slowly, carefully, to touch Rex's scarred face. The Pitbull leaned into her palm and made a sound that shattered the careful weapon Harry had built. A soft, broken whine. The sound of a traumatized animal finally finding something gentle after years of systematic cruelty. Harry's voice cut through the silence like broken glass. "What the fuck did you just do to my dog?" Dina looked up at the man who could still kill her with a word, at the crew of bikers staring at the impossible scene unfolding, at the weapon who'd chosen mercy over murder. And she made a choice that would either save her life or end it in the next 30 seconds. She told Harry Bittner the truth. "I didn't do anything to your dog," Dina said quietly, her hand still resting on Rex's scarred head. "He recognized me, because I work with dogs like him. Dogs you people break and turn into weapons. I know exactly what you did to him." She looked directly into Harry's cold eyes. "I know what it takes to turn a puppy into this. And your dog just remembered what it felt like before you destroyed him." The parking lot went absolutely silent. Harry stared at her, at his perfect weapon sitting peacefully at the feet of a witness who should be dead, at the impossible crack in his sacred rule. And Dina realized with cold certainty that she'd just said the one thing that would make Harry keep her alive long enough to find out how she'd broken his most lethal tool. She'd just bought herself time she didn't know she'd need to survive what came next. Harry Bittner had built his empire on certainty. Certainty that violence, applied precisely, solved problems permanently. Certainty that loyalty bought through fear lasted longer than loyalty earned through respect. Certainty that his sacred rule, witnesses don't survive, kept him alive and out of prison for 15 years while lesser men rotted in cells or unmarked graves. And certainty that Rex, his 90-pound weapon forged through systematic brutality, would never fail. Until tonight. Until a exhausted waitress in a stained uniform touched his dog's scarred face and made the impossible happen. "Get in the van," Harry said, his voice flat and cold. Dina didn't move. Rex remained seated at her feet, his massive head pressed against her leg like he was anchoring himself to the only safe thing in a world of violence. The parking lot had gone absolutely silent. Even the distant traffic noise seemed to fade, as if the city itself was holding its breath. "I said get in the fucking van." Harry's hand moved to his hip, where Dina could see the outline of a gun beneath his leather vest. "If you were going to kill me," Dina said quietly, "you would have done it already." The statement hung in the cold air between them. Harry's second-in-command, a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, stepped forward. "Want me to handle this, boss?" "Back off, Colt." Harry's eyes never left Dina. "She's right. If I wanted her dead, she'd be bleeding out on this asphalt already." He moved closer, and Rex's body tensed, not in aggression toward Dina, but in a protective stance that made several of the bikers exchange uncomfortable glances. A weapon wasn't supposed to protect witnesses. A weapon was supposed to eliminate them. "You did something to my dog," Harry continued, his tone carrying the particular menace of a man unaccustomed to not having answers. "I don't know what. I don't know how. But you're going to explain it to me. Or what? Or I find out if Rex's failure was a one-time malfunction, or if you've somehow permanently broken my most valuable asset." Harry's jaw tightened. "Either way, you're coming with me until I get answers." Dina looked down at Rex, who gazed up at her with eyes that weren't quite as dead as they'd been 5 minutes ago. Something had shifted in the Pitbull's carefully constructed armor of trauma. A crack, letting through the faintest light of the dog he'd been before Harry destroyed him. She had 2 choices: refuse and force Harry to kill her here, or go with him and buy time to figure out how to survive this. Dina had spent 3 years working with abused dogs at an underground rescue. She knew how to read trauma, how to navigate violence, how to find the hairline fractures in seemingly impenetrable armor. She looked at Harry Bittner and saw the same patterns she recognized in Rex. Brutality as self-protection, violence as communication, cruelty as the only language left after everything gentle had been systematically eliminated. "Fine," Dina said. "But Rex comes with me." Harry's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his cold eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or the first hint of genuine uncertainty he'd felt in years. "Rex goes where I tell him to go." "Then tell him to get in the van with me." Dina kept her hand on Rex's head, feeling the tremor in his muscles. Not fear, but the overwhelming confusion of a weapon discovering it might be something more. "Because if you think I'm getting in that van without him, you're going to have to drag me, and that's going to make a scene even you can't clean up quietly." The parking lot remained silent. Harry stared at her for a long moment, and Dina realized she was gambling everything on a single read, that Harry's need for answers outweighed his need for immediate control. "Get in the van," Harry finally said. "Rex, heel." The Pitbull didn't move. Harry's voice hardened. "Rex, heel, now." Rex looked up at Dina, then back at Harry, and whimpered. A soft, uncertain sound that made Colt mutter something under his breath that sounded like, "Jesus Christ." Dina took a step toward the black van, idling at the edge of the parking lot. Rex followed immediately. His body pressed against her leg like he was afraid she'd disappear if he lost contact. Harry's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. The Iron Wraith's clubhouse occupied a converted warehouse in an industrial zone where legitimate businesses didn't ask questions, and security cameras experienced convenient malfunctions. The building's exterior was unremarkable. Corrugated metal siding, small windows set high in concrete walls, a single reinforced door guarded by two prospects whose nervous energy suggested they were newer to this life than the men they protected. Inside, the warehouse had been transformed into a fortress designed for both business and violence. The main room sprawled across the ground floor. Pool tables, a bar that looked like it had been salvaged from a demolished tavern, leather couches arranged around a massive flat-screen TV, and the particular accumulation of motorcycle parts, tools, and weapons that suggested this space served multiple purposes. The walls displayed Iron Wraith's memorabilia, photographs of past members, newspaper clippings carefully preserved behind glass, and a collection of confiscated patches from rival clubs, trophies marking territorial victories. But it was the smell that hit Dina first. Motor oil, cigarette smoke, stale beer, and underneath it all, the metallic scent of old violence that never quite scrubbed clean. Rex stayed glued to her side as Harry led them through the main room, past bikers who stopped their conversations to stare at the impossible scene. Their president's perfect weapon following a waitress like a puppy while Harry Bittner, the man who never broke his sacred rule, escorted a living witness into the heart of his operation. "Upstairs," Harry said, gesturing toward a metal staircase that led to a second-floor office. The office matched the man. Spartan, functional, designed for control rather than comfort. A heavy desk dominated the space, its surface clear except for a laptop and a single-framed photograph Dina couldn't see clearly. Filing cabinets lined one wall. A leather couch occupied the opposite corner. The windows overlooked the main floor below, a vantage point that let Harry monitor his kingdom without being watched himself. Harry closed the door, and the ambient noise from downstairs muffled to a dull murmur. "Sit," he commanded. Dina remained standing. Rex sat at her feet, his eyes tracking Harry's movements with the wary attention of something that had learned to anticipate violence. Harry moved behind his desk, but didn't sit either. He placed both hands flat on the desk surface and leaned forward, and Dina recognized the posture, a predator establishing dominance through physical presence and spatial control. "Start talking," Harry said. What did you do to my dog? I told you. I didn't do anything. Bullshit. Harry's voice remained conversational, but his hands had curled into fists. Rex has eliminated 27 people in 3 years. He's been shot twice, stabbed once, and hit by a car during a chase. Nothing stops him. Nothing makes him hesitate. And tonight, he sat down at your feet like you were his fucking owner and whimpered like a goddamn puppy. Maybe that should tell you something, Dina said quietly. It tells me you sabotaged my weapon somehow. Harry straightened. And I'm going to find out how. You want to know what I did? Dina's exhaustion was bleeding into anger now. The kind of anger that came from 18 months of keeping her head down, from years of survival math, from a lifetime of watching powerful men hurt vulnerable things and call it necessary. I didn't flinch. That's what I did. I stood there while your traumatized dog tried to remember what gentleness felt like, and I didn't hit him. I didn't kick him. I didn't yell or threaten or hurt him. And apparently, that was so fucking unprecedented in his life that it broke his conditioning. Harry's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. Rex isn't traumatized, he said, but there was a hairline crack of uncertainty in his voice. He's trained. Is that what you call it? Dina looked down at Rex, who had pressed himself against her legs with the desperate need of something finally finding safety. Training? I call it survival. Harry moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. That dog was a stray I found half dead in an alley 3 years ago. I gave him food, shelter, purpose. I made him strong. You made him a weapon. Same thing in my world. No, Dina said, and her voice carried the particular authority of someone who'd spent countless hours rehabilitating what men like Harry broke for profit. It's really not. And before we go any further, stick around and because the next 60 seconds will show you exactly what happens when a monster realizes he might be wrong about everything. She knelt down slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. Rex immediately pressed his scarred face against her shoulder, and Dina felt the tremor running through his massive body. Not fear exactly, but the overwhelming confusion of a weapon discovering it might be something more. Her hands moved across Rex's body with practiced efficiency, reading the map of trauma written in scars and tension. This scar on his right shoulder, Dina said, her fingers tracing a thick line of damaged tissue. That's from a chain, probably embedded in his neck and shoulders during puppyhood. You can feel where the muscle developed around the constriction, classic pattern in fighting dogs who spend months chained so tightly they can't move properly. Harry said nothing. These marks on his face, Dina continued, moving to the scattered scars around Rex's muzzle. Puncture wounds from other dogs, but the pattern is wrong for territorial fights. These are from controlled aggression, probably bait dogs used to train him to attack without hesitation. Her hands moved to Rex's ears, feeling the thick scar tissue. Cropped, wrong, not by a vet. Someone did this with household tools, probably without anesthesia. You can feel where the cartilage healed wrong. That's why his ears don't stand up properly. This is pain he carries every single day. I found him like that, Harry said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Maybe you did. Dina looked up at him. But you didn't heal him. You weaponized what someone else broke. She stood, her hand still resting on Rex's head. The Pitbull hadn't moved, hadn't shown any aggression, hadn't done anything except press himself against the first source of gentleness he'd experienced in years. I work with an underground dog rescue, Dina said. We take in fighting dogs, bait dogs, dogs people like you turn into weapons. And we spend months, sometimes years, teaching them that touch doesn't always mean pain, that humans can be something other than a source of trauma, that they're allowed to be dogs instead of monsters. Illegal rescue operation, Harry observed. Animal control would shut you down in a heartbeat. Which is why we stay underground. Dina met his eyes. We can't save them all. The system's designed to euthanize traumatized dogs instead of rehabilitating them. So we work in the spaces between legal and illegal, and we save the ones we can. Harry moved to the window overlooking the main floor, his back to Dina. And that's what you think you're doing? Saving Rex? I think Rex recognized something in me that he hasn't experienced in 3 years. Dina's voice softened. I think your weapon just remembered what it felt like to be a dog, and that scares you more than anything I could have done intentionally. The office went silent except for Rex's quiet breathing. Harry stood at the window for a long moment, and when he finally turned back, his expression was unreadable. But something in his eyes had changed. Not softness exactly, but the first crack in the armor he'd built through 15 years of violence. You're staying here tonight, Harry said. Not a question, a statement. Like a prisoner? Like someone who broke my most valuable weapon and needs to explain how to fix it. Harry's tone had returned to its earlier coldness, but Dina heard the uncertainty underneath. Rex eliminated witnesses because he was reliable, predictable. Now you've made him unpredictable. So you're going to stay here until I figure out if this is permanent damage or a temporary malfunction. And if I refuse? Then I put you in the basement with a locked door and armed guards, and we have this same conversation tomorrow after you've had time to reconsider cooperation. Harry crossed his arms. Your choice. Guest or prisoner. Either way, you're not leaving until I get answers. Dina looked at Rex, who gazed up at her with eyes that were slowly, impossibly, beginning to look less dead. She thought about her studio apartment that would sit empty tonight, about the shift at Mel's diner she'd miss tomorrow, about the underground rescue where volunteers would wonder why she didn't show up. She thought about all the practical reasons she should refuse, should demand her freedom, should fight this forced proximity to a man who'd built his empire on breaking things that wouldn't submit. But she also thought about Rex, a traumatized dog who'd just found the first moment of safety in 3 years, who was trembling against her leg like he was afraid she'd disappear, who needed someone to remember that he was more than the weapon men like Harry had forged him into. I'll stay, Dina said, but not in a basement, and not locked in a room like your prisoner. Harry studied her for a long moment. There's a spare room upstairs, used to be storage, has a bed, a bathroom, a window you can't climb out of without breaking your legs in the fall. Sounds delightful. It's not the Ritz. Something that might have been dark humor flickered across Harry's face. But it's better than the alternative. He moved toward the door, then paused. Rex sleeps in my room, has for 3 years. Does he want to? The question hung between them like a challenge. Harry's jaw tightened. Rex goes where I tell him to go. Then tell him, Dina said quietly. Tell him to leave me and go to your room. See what happens. It was a dangerous gamble, pushing a man who solved problems with violence, who'd never had his authority challenged in his own fortress, who could still decide that eliminating Dina was easier than understanding what she'd revealed about his perfect weapon. But Dina had spent 3 years learning to read the subtle language of traumatized animals, and she could see in Rex's body language, in the way he'd pressed himself against her legs, in the desperate need radiating from his scarred body, that the dog had made a choice. Harry's cold eyes moved from Dina to Rex. Rex, he commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. Come. The Pitbull didn't move. Rex, come, now. Rex whimpered, soft, uncertain, apologetic, but stayed pressed against Dina's legs. The air in the office changed. Dina could feel the shift. The moment when Harry Bittner, who'd spent 15 years building an empire on certainty, confronted something he couldn't control through violence or commands. His weapon had chosen someone else. Jesus Christ, Harry muttered. He ran a hand through his dark hair, and for the first time since Dina had seen him in the parking lot, he looked something other than coldly composed. He looked shaken. Rex has never disobeyed a direct command, Harry said, his voice low. Not once in 3 years. Maybe he's tired of being a weapon, Dina said quietly. Maybe he wants to remember what it's like to be a dog. Harry stared at her for a long moment, and Dina recognized the look. A man confronting a truth he'd spent years avoiding, realizing that the foundation he'd built his identity on might be more fragile than he'd believed. The spare room is down the hall, Harry finally said. Second door on the right. There's a lock on the inside. Use it if you want. But if Rex wants to stay with you... He trailed off, his jaw working like the words tasted wrong in his mouth. Then he stays with you. Just like that? Just like that. Harry moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. But don't mistake this for mercy. You broke my weapon, and you're going to fix him or explain why you can't. Those are the only 2 options that end with you walking out of here alive. He left without waiting for a response, and Dina heard his heavy footsteps descending the metal stairs. She stood in the office for a long moment, her hand still resting on Rex's head, trying to process what had just happened. She'd survived the parking lot, survived the impossible moment when a weapon refused to kill, survived a confrontation with a man who'd built his empire on eliminating witnesses. And now she was trapped in the Iron Wraith's clubhouse with the very dog she'd somehow managed to reach through 3 years of systematic brutality. Rex looked up at her and made a soft sound. Not quite a whimper, not quite a whine, but something in between that sounded almost like a question. Yeah, Dina whispered, kneeling down to look into his scarred face. I don't know what the hell I'm doing either. The spare room was exactly what Harry had described. Functional, sparse, designed for storage rather than comfort. A single bed with military crisp sheets occupied one corner. A small bathroom connected through a narrow door. The window overlooked the warehouse's rear lot, 3 stories up with nothing but concrete below. No escape route except through the clubhouse itself. Dana sat on the edge of the bed, exhaustion finally crashing over her like a wave. Her shift at Mel's Diner had started at 10 p.m. the previous night. It was now nearly 4 a.m. She'd been awake for 22 hours, and the adrenaline that had kept her functioning through the parking lot confrontation and interrogation was finally depleting. Rex had followed her into the room and now stood in the center of the space, his massive body tense with uncertainty. His eyes tracked every movement she made, but he didn't approach the bed, didn't relax, just stood there, waiting for something Dina realized he'd never been given permission to do. Rest without fear. Hey, Dina said softly, patting the bed beside her. You can come up if you want. Rex's ears twitched, but he didn't move. Dina recognized the pattern. A dog so thoroughly conditioned to expect punishment that even invitation felt like a trap. She slid off the bed and sat on the floor instead, her back against the wall, making herself smaller and less threatening. How about here? This okay? Rex took a tentative step forward, then another. His movements were careful, almost hesitant, nothing like the explosive violence he'd displayed in the parking lot when Harry gave the kill command. When Rex finally reached her, he lowered himself to the floor and pressed his scarred body against her side. The tremor running through his muscles was even more pronounced now that Dana could feel it directly. Not fear, exactly, but the overwhelming release of tension that came when something that had been wound too tight for too long finally allowed itself to loosen. Dina's hand moved to Rex's head, her fingers tracing the thick scar tissue around his cropped ears. What did they do to you? She whispered. Before Harry. Before the fighting. What happened to you? Rex made a sound that broke her heart. A soft, broken whine that spoke of trauma so deep it had rewired his entire understanding of what humans were capable of. She'd seen this pattern before, at the rescue. Dogs so systematically abused that they'd forgotten what gentleness felt like. Dogs who'd been starved, beaten, chained, used as bait for more aggressive animals until every instinct screamed that humans were the source of all pain. Those dogs took months to rehabilitate, sometimes years, and some never fully recovered. The trauma carved too deep, the neural pathways rewired too thoroughly. But some did recover. Some remembered, eventually, that they were allowed to be dogs instead of weapons. Dana had saved 11 dogs in 3 years. 11 traumatized animals who'd been written off as too damaged, too aggressive, too dangerous to rehabilitate. She'd taught them that touch didn't always mean pain, that humans could be something other than a source of trauma, that they were allowed to rest without fear. "You're number 12, Dina whispered to Rex. "And I don't care what Harry Bittner thinks he trained you to be. You're still a dog, and you still deserve better than this." Rex's breathing gradually slowed, his body finally beginning to relax against hers. Dina could feel the exact moment when 3 years of weapon conditioning started to crack, not breaking completely, but developing the first hairline fractures that might, eventually, let something gentler through. She sat on the floor of the Iron Wraith's clubhouse spare room, her back against the wall, a 90-pound traumatized Pitbull pressed against her side, and tried to figure out how the hell she was going to survive what came next. Because Harry Bittner wanted answers. And the only answer Dina had was one that would shatter everything he'd built his identity on. That violence wasn't the only language. That fear wasn't the only tool. That even the most broken things could remember what it felt like before they were weaponized. That his sacred rule, witnesses don't survive, had already been broken the moment Rex refused to kill, and that the weapon Harry had spent 3 years forging was choosing to be a dog instead. Dina woke to the sound of heavy boots on metal stairs. Daylight filtered through the window, pale, weak November light that suggested late morning. She'd slept maybe 4 hours, her body curled on the floor with Rex pressed against her side. Her neck ached. Her uniform was wrinkled and stained. Her mouth tasted like the particular combination of exhaustion and terror that came from surviving something that should have killed you. Rex stirred when she moved, his head lifting immediately, his eyes tracking the sound of footsteps with the wary attention of something that had learned danger came in the form of approaching humans. The door opened without knocking. Harry Bittner stood in the doorway, and Dina realized this was the first time she'd seen him in natural light. The parking lot had been all shadows and street lamps. The office had been dimly lit. But daylight revealed details she'd missed. The specific tattoos crawling up his neck, not random designs, but carefully chosen symbols marking territory, allegiances, victories. The scar bisecting his left eyebrow. The particular way he held himself, weight balanced, hands relaxed but ready. The posture of someone who'd survived violence by being faster and more brutal than anyone who challenged him. He looked at Dina on the floor with Rex, and something flickered across his face too quickly for her to identify. "You slept on the floor," he observed. "Rex couldn't get on the bed. So you slept on the floor instead of making him." It wasn't a question, but there was something in Harry's tone that suggested he was evaluating this information and filing it under categories that didn't make sense in his worldview. Dina stood slowly, her muscles protesting. Rex stood with her, his body immediately pressing against her legs in the protective stance he'd adopted the previous night. "I need coffee," Dina said, "and a shower, and my phone so I can call work and tell them I'm not dead." "Your phone's in evidence," Harry said. "We went through it while you slept. Nothing interesting. Lot of texts about dog rescue schedules and rent reminders. No contacts worth worrying about." The casual invasion of privacy should have angered Dina more than it did, but she was too exhausted to summon outrage. So I'm definitely a prisoner then. You're someone who broke my weapon and needs to fix it. Harry's expression remained unreadable. But you can have coffee, showers down the hall. I'll have someone bring you clothes that aren't covered in diner grease. And you'll eat breakfast downstairs with the crew. Why? Because I want them to see you. Harry's eyes narrowed slightly. I want them to see the woman who made Rex fail. And I want to see if Rex's malfunction is permanent, or if being around other people triggers his training again. It was a test, Dina realized. Harry was going to put her in front of his entire crew, in front of the men who'd watched their president's perfect weapons sit down at a witness's feet and whimper, and see what happened. If Rex attacked someone, it would prove his training still held. If Rex didn't attack, it would prove Dina had permanently broken something Harry couldn't fix. Either way, Harry would get information, and Dina would be one step closer to either walking out of here alive or disappearing like every other witness who'd seen Harry Bittner's face during business. Fine, Dina said, but I'm not parading around like your circus act. I'll eat breakfast. I'll let your crew stare, but I'm not performing. Harry's jaw tightened, but he nodded. 30 minutes. Shower, change, then downstairs. Rex stays with you. He turned to leave, then paused. And Dina? Don't mistake my tolerance for mercy. You're alive because I don't have answers yet. The second I do, your usefulness expires. He left, and Dina heard his boots descending the metal stairs. She looked down at Rex, who gazed up at her with eyes that were, impossibly, a little less dead than they'd been 8 hours ago. Well, Dina whispered to the traumatized Pitbull who'd chosen her over his master, let's see if we can both survive breakfast. Harry gave Dina 3 days to fix Rex, 3 days to restore his weapon to perfect function, 3 days to explain how she'd sabotaged his most reliable tool, 3 days to prove she was useful enough to keep breathing. What Harry didn't understand, what his entire worldview prevented him from understanding, was that Dina wasn't fixing Rex. She was untraining him. Again, Harry commanded from across the training yard behind the clubhouse. Rex, attack. The Pitbull sat at Dina's feet, his massive head tilted slightly, watching Harry with an expression that looked almost like confusion, not the dead-eyed compliance of a weapon awaiting deployment. Not the coiled violence of something trained to eliminate threats. Just confusion. Like Rex was trying to remember why he'd ever obeyed that command in the first place. Rex! Harry's voice hardened, carrying the particular edge of a man unaccustomed to being disobeyed. Attack! Now! Rex didn't move. Dina kept her hand resting lightly on Rex's head, her touch gentle and constant. She wasn't restraining him, wasn't holding him back, just providing a steady reminder that touch didn't have to precede violence. He's not broken, Dina said quietly. He's just remembering he has a choice. Harry's jaw clenched. Around the training yard, 6 members of the Iron Wraiths watched the impossible scene unfold. Their president's perfect weapon, refusing direct commands while a waitress stood calmly beside the dog that should be ripping her throat out. Colt stepped forward, his scarred face twisted with disgust. This is bullshit, Harry. She's sabotaging him. Just look at her. She's got him completely fucked up. I can see that, Harry said, his voice dangerously quiet. So handle it. Colt's hand moved to his hip, where Dina could see the outline of a gun. Put the dog down, eliminate the witness, get a new weapon. Problem solved. Rex's body tensed at Colt's aggressive tone, but he didn't leave Dina's side. Instead, he leaned harder against her legs, not in fear, but in the protective stance of something choosing what to defend. Rex isn't the problem, Dina said. Her eyes locked on Harry. Your training is. The training yard went absolutely silent. Harry moved toward her with the fluid grace of a predator closing distance, and Dina's survival instincts screamed at her to step back, to apologize, to remember that she was talking to a man who'd built his empire on eliminating people who challenged his authority. But she held her ground. "Say that again," Harry said, stopping inches from her. "You didn't train Rex." Dina's voice remained steady despite her hammering heart. "You broke him. You took a traumatized dog and weaponized his fear until he forgot he was allowed to be anything except a tool for your violence." "I gave him purpose." "You gave him trauma," Dina interrupted, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice screamed that interrupting Harry Bittner was how witnesses ended up in unmarked graves. "You took something already broken and convinced yourself that making him more broken was the same as making him strong." Harry's hand shot out, grabbing her arm with bruising force. "You don't know what the fuck you're talking about!" Rex's growl cut through the tension like a knife. Not the practiced aggression of a weapon, not the trained violence Harry had spent 3 years cultivating. A real growl, protective, territorial, directed at Harry. The training yard froze. Every biker stared at Rex with the kind of shock reserved for witnessing the impossible. The weapon had just threatened its master. The tool had just chosen the witness over the man who'd forged it. Harry's hand remained on Dina's arm, but his eyes had moved to Rex. "What the fuck?" "Let go of her," Dina said quietly. "Or your weapon is going to remember what teeth are for." Rex's growl deepened, his body lowering into a stance Dina recognized from the rescue. A traumatized dog protecting the first source of safety it had found in years, willing to fight even something it feared if that thing threatened what it was trying to protect. Harry released Dina's arm slowly, his movements careful and controlled. The shock on his face was rapidly transforming into something more complex, not just surprise, but the dawning realization that everything he'd built his identity on might be fundamentally flawed. "He's never—" Harry's voice trailed off. "Never chosen anything over you?" Dina rubbed her arm where Harry's grip had left red marks. "Maybe that should tell you something about the difference between fear and loyalty." Colt stepped forward again, his hand now openly gripping his gun. "Harry, this is getting out of control. Let me handle—" "Back off!" Harry snapped, his eyes never leaving Rex. "Everyone back off, now!" The crew retreated to the edges of the training yard, their expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed contempt. Dina could read their thoughts as clearly as if they'd spoken them aloud. Their president was going soft. The sacred rule was crumbling. The witness should be dead. And instead she was teaching their most lethal weapon to disobey. Harry moved closer to Dina again, but his approach was different this time, slower, more cautious, like he was navigating territory that had suddenly become unpredictable. "What did you do?" he asked, his voice low enough that only Dina could hear. "What the hell did you do to make him choose you over me?" Dina looked up at him, at the man who'd spent 15 years building an empire on violence and certainty, and saw something she hadn't expected. Genuine confusion. Maybe even the first hint of vulnerability. "I didn't do anything," Dina said quietly, "except show him that gentleness was still possible, that he was allowed to trust something other than fear, that he could choose safety over survival." She paused, her eyes searching Harry's face. "Rex didn't choose me over you. He chose healing over trauma, and that terrifies you because it means everything you built him into was just damage you mistook for strength." Harry stared at her for a long moment, and Dina watched the conflict play across his face. Anger warring with something that looked almost like recognition, like he was seeing himself reflected in what she'd said about Rex. Broken things convinced that damage was the same as power. "You think you understand me," Harry finally said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge mixed with something that might have been reluctant fascination. "You think because you can read my dog, you can read me." "I think," Dina said carefully, "that you and Rex have more in common than you want to admit. And that scares you more than anything I could do to your weapon. The tension between them shifted, no longer purely adversarial, but something more complex. Dangerous. Electric with possibility that neither of them knew how to navigate. Harry's eyes dropped to the red marks on Dina's arm, and something flickered across his face. I shouldn't have grabbed you. It wasn't quite an apology. But from a man who'd spent 15 years never apologizing for anything, it was close enough to crack something fundamental. No, Dina agreed. You shouldn't have. Rex had stopped growling, but he remained pressed against Dina's legs, watching Harry with wary attention. Not the dead-eyed compliance of a weapon, not the coiled violence of something ready to eliminate threats. Just a traumatized dog trying to figure out if the man who'd broken him might be capable of something different. And in the training yard behind the Iron Wraith's clubhouse, surrounded by bikers who'd built their lives on violence and certainty, the first real crack appeared in Harry Bittner's sacred rule, because his weapon had chosen healing. And Harry, for the first time in 15 years, didn't know what to do about it. The whispers started on day 5. Dina heard them in the clubhouse. Fragments of conversations that stopped when she entered rooms, phones quickly silenced when she walked past, the particular tension that came when men who lived by violence suddenly had something to fear. Heard the Scorpions are asking questions. Witness still breathing after a week. Harry's lost his fucking mind. She found Harry in his office at midnight, staring at his laptop screen with an expression that made her stomach drop. Rex lay at her feet, where he'd stayed for 5 days straight, refusing to leave her side, even when Harry commanded it. What's wrong? Dina asked. Harry looked up, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before, concern edging toward genuine fear. Close the door, Dina complied. Rex followed her to Harry's desk, his body pressed against her legs in the protective stance that had become constant. Harry turned the laptop toward her. The screen displayed a text message thread, the contact labeled only as Scorpion Intel. Word on the street, Iron Wraith's president keeping a witness alive. Witness saw him working someone over behind Mel's diner, still breathing after 5 days, rules broken. Harry's gone soft. Dana's blood went cold. 3 rival MCs have reached out in the past 6 hours, Harry said quietly, asking if the rumor's true, testing to see if my rule still holds. He leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since Dina had met him, he looked tired. The second they confirm you're alive, they'll see it as weakness, and weakness in this world gets you killed or overthrown. So what are you going to do? That depends. Harry's eyes moved to Rex, then back to Dina. Are you worth dying for? The question hung between them like a blade. Pay attention to this next part, because what Harry decides in the next 60 seconds will either save them both or destroy everything he's built. Subscribe. Before Dina could answer, footsteps pounded up the stairs. Colt burst into the office without knocking, his scarred face flushed with anger. The Scorpions just showed up at our South Territory checkpoint, he said, his voice tight, asking to verify whether Harry's sacred rule still stands. They want proof the witness is handled. Tell them it's handled, Harry said. They want to see a body. Colt's eyes moved to Dina with open hostility. They want confirmation, because right now every MC in Chicago is watching to see if the Iron Wraith's president has gone soft over a fucking waitress. Dina felt Rex tense against her legs. Then they can keep watching, Harry said, his voice carrying absolute authority. The witness situation is my business, not theirs. Your business? Colt stepped forward, his hand hovering near his gun. Harry, this is their business. This is everyone's business. You broke your own rule, the rule that's kept us alive for 15 years. And now every rival club sees us as vulnerable. I didn't break my rule, Harry said coldly. I'm handling the situation my way. By keeping her alive? By letting her turn Rex into a fucking lapdog? Colt's voice rose. Look at him. Your weapon won't even obey you anymore. He follows her around like she's his owner. The crew's talking. They're saying you've lost control. They're saying maybe it's time for new leadership. The threat was explicit now, hanging in the air like cordite. Harry stood slowly, and the temperature in the office dropped. You threatening me, Colt? I'm warning you. Colt held his ground, but Dina could see the fear underneath his anger. Dina Burgos is going to cost you the club. Maybe cost you your life. And she's not worth it. That's not your call to make. Then make the right call yourself. Colt gestured toward Dina. Put a bullet in her head. Dump her body where the scorpions can verify it. Prove your rule still holds. Or step aside and let someone else lead who isn't compromised. Dina's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the moment where Harry would have to choose between his empire and the crack in his armor she'd created. But before Harry could respond, Dina spoke. Rex wasn't a stray, she said quietly. Both men turned to stare at her. What? Harry's voice was sharp. You said you found Rex in an alley 3 years ago. Half-dead stray. Dina knelt beside the Pitbull, her hands moving across his scarred body. But that's not what happened. Look at his teeth. These aren't street dog teeth. Someone took care of him as a puppy, fed him quality food, took him to a vet for early checkups. Her fingers traced the white lightning bolt patch on Rex's chest. This marking is distinctive, memorable, the kind of thing an owner would recognize. And these scars, she indicated the systematic damage across his body. These aren't random street injuries. This is organized abuse, dogfighting rings, training facilities that traffic stolen animals. Harry's expression had gone very still. What are you saying? I'm saying Rex was stolen as a puppy and funneled through the dog-fighting pipeline until someone sold him to you as a weapon. Dina looked up at Harry. And whoever's running that pipeline is still operating, still stealing family dogs, still turning them into monsters for profit. That's not our problem, Colt interjected. It's mine, Dina said, her voice hardening. And I'm going to find whoever did this and expose them. The rescue I work with has been tracking the fighting ring network for 2 years. Rex's scars match the pattern. Same training methods, same systematic abuse. If I can identify where he came from, you're not doing shit, Colt interrupted. You're going to die in the next 24 hours because Harry's too fucking compromised to do what needs to be done. Rex's growl was immediate and unmistakable, not directed at Harry this time, at Colt. The second in command froze, his hand moving toward his gun. Call off your dog, Harry. He's not my dog anymore, Harry said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made Dina's skin prickle. Apparently he's hers. Dina stood slowly, placing her hand on Rex's head. The Pitbull remained tense, his eyes locked on Colt with protective aggression that had nothing to do with trained violence and everything to do with choosing what to defend. Rex isn't dangerous, Dina said. He's afraid. Afraid the violence will start again. Afraid the trauma will continue, and he's defending the first thing that's made him feel safe in 3 years. That's exactly the problem, Colt said, his voice dripping with contempt. Your weapon's choosing a witness over the club, and you're letting it happen. He turned to Harry. 24 hours. That's how long until the Scorpions demand proof. And if you can't provide it, they'll take it as confirmation you've gone soft. Then every rival MC in Chicago will come for us. Colt stormed out, his boots pounding down the stairs. The office went silent except for Rex's breathing. Harry stood at his desk, staring at the closed door, and Dina watched the conflict play across his face. Empire versus conscience, power versus redemption, the rule that had kept him alive versus the crack that was spreading through everything he'd built. They're right, Harry finally said. You're going to cost me everything. I know. And you don't care? I care, Dina said quietly. But I care more about exposing whoever's running the dogfighting pipeline. And I care about Rex remembering he's allowed to be something other than your weapon. Harry looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his eyes. Not softness exactly, but recognition. Like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. You're either the bravest person I've ever met, he said, or the most suicidal. Maybe both. Harry's laugh was short and sharp. Yeah, maybe both. He moved to the window, looking down at the main floor where his crew was undoubtedly discussing whether their president had lost his mind. The rule isn't just cracked anymore, Harry said quietly. It's shattered. And everyone can see it. Dina joined him at the window, Rex pressed between them. So what are you going to do? Harry was silent for a long moment. Then, I don't know. And that terrifies me more than any rival MC ever could. The meeting happened on neutral ground, a warehouse in the industrial district where territorial lines blurred and business could be conducted without triggering immediate violence. Harry brought 6 men. The Scorpions brought 7. And because Rex refused to leave her side, Harry brought Dina. This is a mistake, Colt muttered as they approached the warehouse entrance. Bringing her to a business meeting, letting them see the witness is still breathing. They already know, Harry said, his voice flat. That's why we're here. Dina could feel the tension radiating from every member of Harry's crew. They moved like men walking into an ambush, hands hovering near weapons, eyes scanning for threats. Rex pressed against her legs, his body coiled with the particular awareness of something trained to recognize violence before it erupted. The warehouse interior was vast and empty except for 2 rows of chairs facing each other like opposing armies preparing for negotiation. Industrial lights cast harsh shadows. The air smelled of oil and rust, and the metallic anticipation that preceded bloodshed. The Scorpions were already waiting. Their president, a man named Vince Carreras with prison tattoos crawling up his neck and eyes that had seen too much violence to flinch at anything, sat in the center chair, flanked by his lieutenants. He smiled when Harry entered, and it was the kind of smile that promised nothing good. Harry Bittner, Vince said, his voice carrying mock warmth. Heard you've been keeping interesting company lately. His eyes moved to Dina, and she felt the weight of his evaluation. Not sexual, but calculating. Assessing her value as leverage or threat. Business meeting, Harry said coldly. Not social hour. You wanted to talk about the North Territory distribution. Let's talk. Oh, we'll get to that. Vince leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. But first, I'm curious about something. See, word on the street is you've got a witness living in your clubhouse. Witness who saw you working someone over behind Mel's diner. Witness who should be dead according to your sacred rule. The warehouse went absolutely silent. Harry's expression didn't change, but Dana could feel the shift in his crew. Tension ratcheting up. Hands moving closer to weapons, the particular preparation for violence that came when negotiations broke down. My business, Harry said, not yours. That's where you're wrong. Vince stood, his movements deliberately slow and threatening. When the man who built his reputation on witnesses don't survive suddenly keeps one alive, that becomes everyone's business. Makes us wonder if Harry Bittner's rule still holds. Makes us wonder if the Iron Wraiths are still the crew we need to respect. One of Vince's lieutenants, a man with a shaved head and a scar bisecting his lip, stepped forward. Makes us wonder if maybe the king's gone soft. If maybe it's time for new management. Colt shifted beside Harry, and Dina saw something flicker across his scarred face. Calculation. Opportunity. The witness is handled, Harry said, his voice carrying absolute authority despite the lie. She's alive because I'm extracting information. When I'm done, she's eliminated. The rule holds. Does it? Vince moved closer, deliberately entering Harry's personal space. because from where I'm standing, it looks like your weapon's more loyal to her than to you." He gestured at Rex, who stood rigid against Dina's legs, his eyes tracking every movement in the warehouse. "Prove it," Vince said. "Give your dog the command. Let him show us the Iron Wraiths still have teeth." The warehouse compressed with tension. Dina's heart hammered against her ribs. She could see what Vince was doing, forcing Harry into an impossible choice: attack his own witness and prove the rule held, or refuse and confirm that his control was slipping. Harry's eyes moved to Rex, then to Dina. For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then Harry spoke, his voice cold and commanding. "Rex, attack." Rex's body tensed, muscles coiling for explosive violence. His training, 3 years of conditioning, systematic brutality, commands reinforced through pain, fired across neural pathways that screamed obedience. But then Rex did something that made every man in the warehouse go absolutely still. He looked at Dina. Not at the scorpions. Not at the target Harry's command had designated. At Dina, waiting for her permission. Time fractured. Dina held Rex's gaze and gave the smallest shake of her head. Just a tiny movement, barely visible. Rex sat down. The warehouse exploded with murmured reactions. Shocked whispers from both crews, the sound of men realizing they were witnessing something that changed everything. Vince's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Well, fuck me. The weapon just disobeyed a direct command in front of both clubs." He turned to his crew, his voice carrying theatrical disbelief. "Harry Bittner's perfect weapon just chose a witness over its master." He moved closer to Harry, his smile vicious. "You're done, Harry. Your rule's shattered. Your crew knows it. My crew knows it. And by tomorrow morning, every MC in Chicago will know that the Iron Wraith's president let a witness break his most sacred rule." "Careful," Harry said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Or what?" Vince gestured at Rex, who remained seated at Dina's feet. "You'll sick your dog on me? The dog that won't obey you anymore?" He leaned in close enough that Dina could see the prison tattoos on his neck. "Here's what's going to happen. We're walking out of here. And we're spreading the word that Harry Bittner's gone soft, that the Iron Wraiths are vulnerable, that maybe it's time for new leadership." He pulled back, his eyes moving to Colt. "And when that happens, we'll be ready to negotiate with whoever takes over." The threat was explicit now, not just to Harry's reputation, but to his life. Colt's expression remained carefully neutral, but Dina saw the calculation in his eyes, the recognition that Vince was offering him something, support for a coup in exchange for returning the Iron Wraiths to their previous ruthlessness. The scorpions filed out, their laughter echoing in the vast warehouse. Harry stood motionless, his jaw clenched so tight Dina thought she heard teeth grinding. When the warehouse door slammed shut, Colt turned to Harry. "This is what I warned you about. Dina's cost you everything. The rule's broken, the respect's gone, and now every rival MC sees us as weak." He gestured at the crew. "The men are talking. They're saying maybe it's time for leadership that isn't compromised. Maybe it's time for someone who remembers what the Iron Wraith stood for before you let a witness turn our weapon into a fucking pet." Harry's hand moved to his gun with predatory speed, pressing the barrel against Colt's forehead. "You threatening me?" "I'm stating facts." Colt held his ground despite the gun. 24 hours ago, you were untouchable. Now you're vulnerable because of her. And if you can't see that, you're not fit to lead anymore." The warehouse went silent, except for the sound of breathing and the metallic click of Harry cocking his gun. Dina's voice cut through the tension. "Harry, don't!" Harry didn't lower the gun, didn't move, just stood there with his finger on the trigger, staring at his second-in-command with the cold calculation of a man deciding whether to eliminate a threat or absorb the challenge. Finally, slowly, he lowered the weapon. "Get out of my sight," Harry said quietly. "All of you." The crew filed out, Colt last, his expression promising this wasn't over. When they were alone, just Harry, Dina, and Rex in the vast empty warehouse, Harry turned to face her. "You just destroyed me," he said, his voice carrying something that sounded almost like wonder. "One look, one shake of your head, and my weapon chose you over everything I built into him." "He chose healing over trauma," Dina said quietly. "That's not the same thing." "In my world," Harry's laugh was bitter, "it's exactly the same thing." He moved to the warehouse door, then paused. Colt's planning something. Probably a coup. Probably with Scorpion backing. And I'm too compromised to stop it because my weapon won't obey me and my witness is still breathing. "So what are you going to do?" Harry looked at her for a long moment, and Dina saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke it. "I don't know if I can protect you anymore. The kingdom's turning on its king, and you're the reason why." It happened at 3 a.m. when the clubhouse was quietest. Dina woke to the sound of her door crashing open and hands grabbing her before she could scream. Rex lunged with a snarl that would have torn throat from bone, but someone had anticipated that. A steel pole with a loop caught him mid-attack, yanking him back and slamming him against the wall. "Chain the dog!" Colt's voice cut through the chaos. "Harry can have him back when this is over." Dina fought, kicking, clawing, trying to scream, but a hand clamped over her mouth and something sharp pricked her neck. Not enough to knock her out, but enough to make her limbs go heavy and uncooperative. Through blurring vision, she saw them drag Rex backward, his claws scraping desperately against the floor as they secured him to a steel support beam with chains thick enough to hold a truck. His snarls had transformed into something worse, broken, desperate sounds that cut through Dina's drugged haze like knives. "Don't hurt him," she managed to slur. "Please." "Shut her up," Colt ordered. Rough fabric gagged her mouth. Hands zip-tied her wrists, and then she was being carried down the stairs, through the clubhouse where Harry's loyal crew had been deliberately stationed on the far side of the building, into the cold night air where a van waited with its engine running. The last thing Dina heard before the van door slammed was Rex's howl, raw and agonized, the sound of something breaking that had barely begun to heal. The warehouse was different from the one where they'd met the Scorpions. Older, more isolated, with broken windows that let in harsh streetlight and the smell of rust and decay. They tied Dina to a chair in the center of the concrete floor, surrounded by a circle of bikers. She counted 14 men, Colt and 6 Iron Wraiths who'd chosen his side, plus Vince Carreras and 6 Scorpions who wore expressions that promised violence. The drug was wearing off, clarity returning with each painful heartbeat. "She's awake," someone observed. Colt moved in front of her, his scarred face illuminated by a hanging work light. "Nothing personal," he said, almost conversationally. "But you cost Harry everything, and now he's going to fix it." He pulled the gag from Dina's mouth. "Harry will kill you for this," she said, her voice hoarse. "Harry's going to kill you for this." Colt crouched to eye level. "See, we sent him a message. Told him where you are. Told him the only way to prove his rule still holds is to come here and execute his witness himself. In front of both clubs. Put a bullet in your head and show everyone the Iron Wraith's president isn't compromised." Dina's blood went cold. "And if he doesn't?" she whispered. Vince Carreras stepped forward, his smile vicious. "Then we execute you anyway. Film it. And send the video to every MC in Chicago as proof Harry's too weak to enforce his own rule. Either way, you die. Question is whether Harry chooses power or conscience." "He'll choose you," Colt added, standing. "He has to, because if he doesn't, I take over the Iron Wraiths with Scorpion backing. And the first thing I do is hunt down everyone who supported Harry's weakness, starting with that fucking dog." Dina's heart hammered against her ribs. "Rex has nothing to do with this. Rex is the symbol of everything Harry got wrong." Colt's voice hardened. "A weapon that won't obey. A dog that chose a witness over its master. When this is over, Rex gets put down. Can't have a reminder of Harry's failure walking around. The threat ignited something in Dina's chest. Not fear for herself, but rage for Rex. The traumatized dog who'd barely begun to remember what healing felt like, who'd chosen trust over violence, who'd defended her when his entire world had been built on hurting things that showed weakness. "You're all monsters," Dina said quietly. "We're survivors," Vince corrected. "And sentiment gets you killed in this world." He checked his watch. "Harry should be getting our message right about now. Let's see if he chooses his kingdom or his conscience." Harry found Rex first. The steel support beam had gouged chunks from the concrete floor where Rex had thrown his 90 pounds of muscle and desperation against the chains. His claws were bloody, his throat was raw from howling. And when Harry entered the spare room where Dina should have been sleeping, Rex's snarls transformed into something that made Harry's chest tighten, grief. "Easy," Harry said, approaching slowly. "Easy, boy. I'm getting you out." But when Harry moved to unlock the chains, Rex lunged, not to attack, but straining toward the door with such violence that the chains groaned. His entire body screamed a single message: "Find her! Find her! Find her!" Harry's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Your witness. West Side Warehouse on Monroe. 1 hour. Come alone and execute her yourself. Prove your rule holds. Or we do it for you and film it. Choose." An address followed. Harry stared at his phone, and for the first time in 15 years he felt genuine fear. Not for himself. He'd faced death enough times that it had lost its edge. But for Dina. For the woman who'd cracked his armor and shown him that violence wasn't the only language. For the woman who'd made him break his most sacred rule without even trying. Rex's whimpers cut through his thoughts. Desperate, broken sounds that Harry had never heard from his weapon before. Harry unlocked the chains. Rex exploded toward the door, but Harry caught his collar. "Wait, we're going. But you follow my lead, understand?" Rex's eyes, no longer dead, no longer empty, locked onto Harry's with an intensity that made everything clear. The dog wasn't his weapon anymore. Maybe never had been. Rex was his own being, capable of choosing what mattered, what to protect, what to fight for. And right now, Rex was choosing Dina. "Yeah," Harry whispered, his hand resting on Rex's scarred head. "Me too." He grabbed his gun, his backup piece, and the knife he kept strapped to his ankle. Then he opened the door and followed Rex down the stairs, through the clubhouse where the few loyal crew members stared in shock at their president, following a dog like the animal was leading him. Rex hit the exit at full speed, nose to the ground, tracking Dina's scent with the single-minded focus of something that had found purpose beyond violence. Harry followed. Through the industrial district, down alleys where legitimate people didn't walk, past territory markers and gang tags that warned of dangerous ground. Rex never hesitated, never slowed. Just followed Dina's scent like a lifeline, pulling him toward something worth dying for. And Harry, president of the Iron Wraiths MC, the man who'd built his empire on fear and certainty, followed a traumatized dog into enemy territory to save a witness who should have died the moment she saw his face. The warehouse loomed ahead, its broken windows glowing with harsh light. Rex's growl was low and continuous, not the trained aggression Harry had cultivated, but something more primal. Protective. Territorial. Harry checked his gun, chambered around, and made the choice that would either save them all or destroy everything he'd spent 15 years building. He opened the warehouse door, and inside, surrounded by 14 men who wanted her dead, Dina looked up with eyes that held no fear, only the quiet certainty of someone who'd known from the beginning that this was how it would end. Harry met her gaze across the warehouse floor, and something passed between them that needed no words. "I'm here, we're here, and we're not leaving without you." Rex's snarl filled the warehouse like a promise of violence, and Harry Bittner, for the first time in his life, chose conscience over power. "Let her go," he said quietly, "or I burn this whole fucking city down. And you're about to see why you don't corner a man who's finally found something worth protecting. Stay with me." Rex didn't wait for strategy. The moment Harry opened the warehouse door, 90 pounds of traumatized Pitbull exploded through the gap with a snarl that sounded like tearing metal. He hit the first guard, one of the iron wraiths who'd betrayed Harry, with enough force to send the man crashing into a stack of pallets. But Rex didn't kill. His teeth found the man's arm, clamped down hard enough to break bone, then released. The guard screamed and scrambled backward, clutching his mangled limb. Rex was already moving toward the next threat, his scarred body a blur of controlled violence. Not the mindless weapon Harry had trained him to be. Something more precise, more intentional. Defending, not destroying. Harry followed Rex into the warehouse, his gun raised, his eyes scanning the circle of bikers surrounding Dina. 14 men, 2 clubs, all watching him with expressions ranging from shock to calculated anticipation. "Impressive entrance," Vince Carreras said, his voice carrying mock appreciation. "But you're outnumbered, outgunned, and about 5 seconds from dying. So let's skip the heroics." Harry's gun didn't waver. "I said let her go. And I said prove your rule still holds." Colt stepped forward, his scarred face illuminated by the harsh worklight. His gun was already drawn, pointed casually at Dina's head. "You want her alive? Then show us you're still the man who built the Iron Wraiths. Give Rex the kill command. End your witness. Prove the sacred rule isn't broken." The warehouse went absolutely silent except for Rex's low, continuous growl. The Pitbull had positioned himself between Dina's chair and the circle of bikers, his body coiled and ready, his eyes tracking every movement with predatory focus. Harry's finger rested on his trigger, and for the first time in 15 years his hand trembled. Not from fear, from the tectonic shift of identity splitting apart. The old Harry, the man who'd survived 15 years by making violence into certainty, who'd built his empire on the sacred rule that witnesses don't survive, screamed at him to give the command, to prove his control, to show that sentiment was weakness and power required sacrifice, that Harry would have pulled the trigger without hesitation. But the new Harry, the man who'd watched Dina heal his weapon with gentleness, who'd felt something crack in his chest when Rex chose her over violence, who'd discovered that fear wasn't the only way to survive, saw something different. He saw Dina tied to a chair with zip ties cutting into her wrists, her face bruised but her eyes defiant. He saw Rex standing guard over her with a loyalty that had nothing to do with conditioning and everything to do with choice. He saw 14 men waiting to watch him prove that power mattered more than conscience, and he realized he couldn't do it. Couldn't give the command. Couldn't sacrifice the first person who'd shown him that redemption was possible even for monsters. "Harry," Colt's voice carried warning, "this is your last chance. Give the command or lose everything. The club, your reputation, your life, all of it ends if you don't prove the rule still holds." Harry's gun stayed raised, but he didn't aim at Dina. He aimed at Colt. "The rule's already broken," Harry said quietly. "I broke it the moment I let her live, and I'm not fixing it by killing her now." The warehouse erupted with reactions. Shocked murmurs from the Iron Wraiths, vicious laughter from the Scorpions, Colt's expression transforming from anticipation to fury. "Then you just signed your death warrant," Colt said. He cocked his gun, the sound echoing in the vast space. "And hers." "No," Harry said. "I signed yours." He pulled the trigger. The shot echoed like thunder. Colt's gun hand exploded in blood and shattered bone, the weapon clattering to concrete. Colt screamed, stumbling backward, and chaos erupted. Rex launched at the nearest Scorpion, teeth finding throat, but pulling back before the kill, leaving the man gasping and bleeding but alive. Another biker rushed Harry from the side. Harry's elbow caught him in the temple with enough force to drop him instantly. Gunfire cracked through the warehouse, wild, panicked shots that ricocheted off concrete and metal. Harry moved like violence given form, each action precise and brutal. He wasn't trying to kill. Not yet. But he was making it clear that anyone who threatened Dina would pay a price measured in broken bones and blood. Vince Carreras raised his gun toward Harry's back. Rex hit him from the side with enough force to break ribs. Vince crashed to the ground, his gun skittering away, and Rex stood over him with teeth bared and murder gleaming in eyes that were no longer dead. But still, Rex didn't kill, just held, waited, controlled the violence instead of being controlled by it. "Get her out!" Harry shouted, firing twice more, both shots finding kneecaps, dropping threats without ending lives. But he was surrounded now. Too many men. Too many guns. And even with Rex fighting beside him, the math was brutal and inevitable. A Scorpion lieutenant appeared behind Dina's chair, his knife already at her throat. "Drop the gun," the man said. "Or I open her—" The rest of his threat died when Dina slammed her head backward, catching him square in the nose. The knife wavered for a fraction of a second, long enough for Rex to cross the distance and clamp his jaws around the man's wrist. The knife fell. Dana kicked backward with her chair, toppling it and rolling away from the immediate kill zone. Her hands were still zip-tied, but she was moving, fighting, refusing to be the helpless victim Colt had planned for. Harry reached her in 3 strides, dropping to one knee to cut her restraints while his gun swept the warehouse, tracking threats. "Can you run?" he asked. "Watch me," Dina gasped. "Then run. Back door. Rex will—" A shot cracked past Harry's head, close enough that he felt the displacement of air. Colt had retrieved his gun with his uninjured hand, his face twisted with rage and pain. "You chose her over everything," he screamed. "Over the club, over your brothers, over 15 years of blood and loyalty." "I chose conscience over fear," Harry said, pulling Dina to her feet. "Turns out there's a difference." He fired twice, both shots finding Colt's legs, dropping the man to concrete in a spreading pool of blood. "Rex!" Harry commanded. "Guard!" The Pitbull immediately moved to Dina's side, his body pressed against her legs in the protective stance that had become instinct. The remaining bikers, 5 Scorpions and 3 Iron Wraiths, formed a loose circle, guns raised, the particular calculation of men deciding whether to press the attack or cut their losses visible in their expressions. "You're dead," Vince Carreras spat, clutching his broken ribs. "You and your witness and your fucking dog. We'll hunt you down. Every MC in Chicago will—" "Try it," Harry interrupted, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "And I'll show you what I built my reputation on before I decided sentiment was weakness. Come for me, come for her, come for Rex, and I'll burn every clubhouse, every territory, every business you've ever touched until there's nothing left but ashes and regret." He grabbed Dina's hand. "We're leaving. Anyone who follows us dies." The circle held, but didn't close. Harry backed toward the warehouse's rear exit, his gun never wavering, Rex flanking Dina with continuous low growls that promised violence to anyone who moved wrong. They reached the door. Harry kicked it open. And standing in the alley beyond, blocking their escape, were 8 more Scorpions. The ambush within the ambush. Vince's laugh echoed through the warehouse, wet with pain but triumphant. "You really think we'd make it that easy? You're trapped, Harry. And your witness dies here, tonight, in front of everyone." Harry's gun tracked between threats, but the math was impossible now. Too many guns, too many angles, no cover, no escape. His empire crumbling, his sacred rule shattered, his life measured in seconds. But when he looked at Dina, bruised and bleeding but standing tall beside him, her hand gripping his with desperate strength. Harry realized something that changed everything. He'd rather die with her than live with the man he'd been before she showed him there was another way. "Together," he said quietly, meeting her eyes. "Together," Dina agreed. Rex's snarl filled the alley like a war cry. And Harry Bittner made his final choice. He'd fight. He'd lose. But he'd lose as someone who'd chosen redemption over power. That was enough. But wait. Before we continue, subscribe, like, and share, because what happens next will prove that sometimes the most broken things know exactly when to remember what they were made for. Colt dragged himself across the concrete, leaving a trail of blood from his shattered legs, his uninjured hand gripping his gun with the desperate strength of a man who had nothing left to lose. He reached Dina before Harry could stop him. The gun pressed against her temple, cold metal that promised finality. "One last chance," Colt gasped, his voice ragged with pain and fury. "Give Rex the kill command. End her. Right here. Right now." In front of everyone. He looked up at the circle of bikers, iron wraiths and scorpions alike, all watching with the hungry anticipation of men witnessing history. "Prove your rule still holds. Prove you're still the man we followed." The warehouse went absolutely silent. Harry stood 15 feet away, his gun raised but useless. Any shot risked hitting Dina. Rex was frozen beside him, every muscle coiled with lethal tension, a growl building in his chest like distant thunder. 14 men watched, waiting, judging, waiting to see if Harry Bittner would sacrifice his conscience to save his empire. "Do it," Colt commanded, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Give the command. Rex kills her, you prove you're still ruthless, and maybe, you keep the Iron Wraiths. Otherwise, I pull this trigger and you lose everything anyway." Harry's eyes moved to Dina. She wasn't crying, wasn't begging, just looking at him with an expression that held no accusation, no demand, no expectation of rescue, just understanding. She'd known from the beginning that this was how it might end, that choosing her meant destroying everything he'd built, that love and power couldn't coexist in a world built on violence and fear. Harry's eyes moved to Rex, the Pitbull who'd been his perfect weapon for 3 years, who'd never failed, never hesitated, never shown weakness, who'd been broken and rebuilt into something lethal and obedient, until Dina had shown him that healing was possible, that choice was possible, that he could be something more than the monster men had forged him into. Harry's eyes moved to the life he'd built. 15 years of violence and certainty, 15 years of the sacred rule that had kept him alive and powerful. 15 years of building an empire on the foundation that witnesses don't survive, that fear was the only reliable currency, that sentiment was weakness waiting to be exploited. 15 years of being someone he suddenly couldn't recognize. The old Harry would have given the command without hesitation, would have sacrificed Dina to preserve power, would have proven that his rule still held, that fear still worked, that violence remained the only language worth speaking. But the old Harry had died the moment Rex sat at Dina's feet and whimpered, the moment Harry realized that his weapon had chosen healing over trauma, the moment he understood that redemption was possible even for monsters. Harry lowered his gun. The warehouse erupted with shocked murmurs. "No," Harry said quietly, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "I'm not that man anymore." Colt's face twisted with rage. "Then you just killed her." "Rex," Harry said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Not the kill command. Not the order that would end Dina's life. Just his name. Rex moved. Not with the mindless violence of a weapon, not with the trained brutality Harry had cultivated for 3 years, but with the precise, intentional fury of something protecting what it loved. He hit Colt with enough force to tear the gun away from Dina's head and send it skittering across concrete. Colt screamed as Rex's jaws found his gun arm, not killing, but destroying the hand that had threatened Dina. Brutal, fast, precise. The warehouse exploded into chaos. Scorpions rushed forward, guns raised. Iron wraiths fractured, some moving to defend Harry, some joining Colt's rebellion, some frozen with uncertainty as their entire worldview shattered. Harry grabbed Dina, pulling her behind him as gunfire cracked through the vast space. He returned fire, controlled shots that found kneecaps and shoulders, disabling threats without killing. Not mercy, exactly, but recognition that ending lives wasn't the only way to end fights. Rex was a blur of controlled violence, attacking anyone who threatened Dina, but pulling back before the kill, breaking bones instead of tearing throats, disabling instead of destroying. A weapon that had learned to choose its targets, a dog that had remembered there was a difference between protecting and murdering. "Back door!" Harry shouted, his gun clicking empty. He grabbed Dina's hand and ran, Rex flanking them with continuous snarls that kept pursuers at bay. They burst through the rear exit into the alley where 8 scorpions had been waiting, but 3 had already fled when the warehouse descended into chaos, and the remaining 5 hesitated just long enough for Harry to reach his backup piece. "Move or die!" Harry roared, and something in his voice, the absolute certainty of a man who'd chosen his hill to die on and made peace with the consequences, made the scorpions scatter. They ran, through alleys, past territory markers, down streets where Chicago's underworld conducted business in shadows. Behind them, sirens wailed. Someone had called the cops, probably hoping to clean up whoever survived the bloodbath. Harry's motorcycle was parked 3 blocks away. He'd ridden it into enemy territory like a man with a death wish, and now it represented the only escape route left. "Can you ride?" he gasped. "Not well," Dina admitted. "Good enough." Harry threw his leg over the bike, Dina climbing behind him, Rex running alongside as Harry kicked the engine to life. They roared into the Chicago night. A biker who'd just destroyed his empire, a witness who should have died 7 days ago, and a traumatized dog who'd chosen love over violence. Behind them, the iron wraiths fractured. Some would follow Colt's vision, returning to the old ways, rebuilding the empire on fear and certainty. Some would scatter, finding new clubs or going independent. And some, a handful of men who'd watched Harry choose conscience over power, would wonder if maybe there was another way to survive day. But Harry didn't look back. He'd walked away from his throne, burned his kingdom, shattered his sacred rule. And as Dina's arms wrapped around his waist, holding tight as they disappeared into the city's labyrinth of streets, Harry realized something that changed everything. He'd traded power for peace, empire for redemption, fear for love, and for the first time in 15 years that felt like winning. The sacred rule was dead, and Harry Bittner, the man who'd built his identity on violence and certainty, was finally, impossibly, free. 6 months later, Harry Bittner woke to sunlight filtering through curtains that didn't have reinforced steel underneath. No armed guards outside the door, no sounds of bikes rumbling in the compound below, no weight of empire pressing against his chest like a hand around his throat. Just silence. Peace. And Dina's breathing beside him in the bed they'd bought together from a furniture store where nobody recognized his face or cared about his past. Rex slept at the foot of the bed, his scarred body finally relaxed in sleep that didn't anticipate violence. The nightmares had stopped 3 months ago. The ones where he'd wake snarling and confused, his trauma dragging him back to fighting rings and chains and systematic brutality. Now, he just slept, healed, safe, loved. Harry slipped out of bed carefully, pulling on jeans and a t-shirt that didn't have any club patches. His morning routine had changed. No weapons check, no territory reports, no calculations about which rival MC needed reminding that the Iron Wraiths owned this block. Just coffee. Breakfast. The mundane rituals of a man building a legitimate life from the ashes of his burned empire. The apartment was small. 2 bedrooms in a neighborhood where working people raised families, and the biggest crime was parking violations. It had cost a fraction of what Harry had hidden away over 15 years of running the Iron Wraiths. Money he'd laundered clean and used to build something that wouldn't collapse the moment someone decided he'd gone soft. Bittner Security Solutions occupied a modest office in a commercial district where small businesses clustered like barnacles. The sign outside was professional but understated. The client list included restaurants, small retailers, and property managers who needed security consultants without criminal connections. Legitimate work. Legal income. A business that wouldn't get him killed or imprisoned. It was boring as hell, and Harry had never been happier. "You're up early?" Dina said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with Rex at her side. She wore one of Harry's old t-shirts and had her hair pulled back in the messy bun that meant she'd been up late doing paperwork for the rescue. "Big installation today," Harry said, pouring her coffee. "Restaurant owner wants a complete security overhaul. Cameras, alarms, employee protocols." "Sounds thrilling." "It pays the bills." Harry handed her the mug, and their fingers touched in the small intimacy that had replaced the dangerous tension of those first days in the clubhouse. "How's the rescue looking?" Dina's face lit up, the same expression she got every time she talked about the work that mattered more to her than survival. "We got approval for the new facility. 3 times the space, proper medical setup, room for 20 dogs instead of 7. The grant came through." "And the donors?" "Still anonymous." She smiled over her coffee, and they both knew the truth. Harry had funneled most of his hidden money into funding Dina's underground rescue, making it legitimate and sustainable. Whoever they are, they're very generous. Harry's phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "Heard you're running security now." Pathetic. "You used to run Chicago. Now you're installing cameras for restaurant owners. The streets remember what you were, traitor." He deleted it without responding. The messages came weekly. Former Iron Wraiths, rival MCs, criminals who'd known Harry when he was someone worth fearing. They called him weak, soft. A traitor who'd chosen a woman over his brothers. They weren't wrong, but they weren't right either. "Another one?" Dina asked, reading his expression. "Doesn't matter." "Harry." She set down her coffee, moving closer. "You can tell me if you regret." "I don't." The words came fast and certain. "I don't regret any of it." He pulled her close, his hands resting on her waist, and tried to explain something he was still learning the language for. "For 15 years, I thought power meant being feared, that the only way to survive was making sure everyone knew I was more brutal, more ruthless, more willing to do violence than anyone who challenged me." Rex padded over, pressing against their legs in the protective stance that had become habit. "But that wasn't power," Harry continued. "That was just fear wearing power's mask. Real power is choosing what matters, building something that lasts, walking away from a kingdom that required me to be a monster." Dina's hand moved to his face, her thumb tracing the scar bisecting his eyebrow. "The criminal world thinks you're weak. Let them think it. Your former brothers call you a traitor. I betrayed what I was, not who I could become. And the streets remember." "I don't care what the streets remember." Harry's voice was quiet but absolute. "Because you don't call me by my reputation. You don't call me president or boss or any of the titles I built through violence. You just call me Harry." He pulled back to look at her directly. "And that's worth more than any empire." Dina's eyes glistened. Harry. I used to think I saved you, he interrupted. That night in the parking lot. I thought keeping you alive made me merciful, that protecting you from Colt and the Scorpions made me your savior. He glanced down at Rex, who gazed up at them with eyes that were no longer dead, no longer empty, just the warm brown eyes of a dog who'd remembered what love felt like. But I had it backward, Harry said. You didn't need saving from my world. I needed saving from what that world had made me. Dina's hand tightened on his. We saved each other. Maybe. Harry smiled, something he'd learned to do again in the 6 months since he'd walked away from his throne. But you saved me first. Rex made a soft sound. Not quite a whimper, not quite a whine, but something in between that sounded almost like contentment. They stood in their small kitchen as morning light painted everything gold, and Harry realized he'd finally found the thing that had eluded him through 15 years of violence and fear. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of something worth protecting that didn't require him to be a monster. A woman who'd shown him that redemption was possible. A dog who'd chosen healing over trauma. A life built from the ashes of his burned empire that felt more real than anything he'd constructed through brutality. Outside, Chicago woke to another day of commerce and chaos. The Iron Wraiths still existed under new leadership. Colt had survived and rebuilt the club in his image, returning to the old ways where fear was currency and sentiment was weakness. Rival MCs still controlled their territories. The criminal underworld still operated in shadows, and somewhere in that world, Harry Bittner's name was whispered as a cautionary tale, the king who'd chosen conscience over power and lost everything that mattered. But standing in his small kitchen with Dina in his arms and Rex at their feet, Harry knew the truth. He hadn't lost anything that mattered. He'd just finally figured out what mattered in the first place. Dina pulled back, her eyes searching his face. You okay? Yeah, Harry said, and meant it completely. I'm home. Rex's tail thumped against the floor, the sound of a weapon who'd remembered how to be a dog, in a home built by people who'd remembered how to be human. And in that moment, Harry understood the final truth that changed everything. He hadn't saved Dina from his world. Dina had saved him from it. And that's where their story begins. Not in the violence that almost destroyed them, but in the peace they built from its ruins. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe, because redemption is always possible, even for monsters who choose to become something more. Welcome to the family.